In today's clip, I'm going to touch upon a fundamental debate within the personal finance space, and thus by extension the FIRE community, which is your primary residence really an investment, and how that relates to net worth? Hey, Zempak here. Another day just grinding out another clip, because it's not like it's safe to go outside willy-nilly anyway. So if you're here for one reason or another, comment, like, and subscribe to get over these pandemic blues. So, I'm part of the FIRE, no, not Pyromaniacs, but Financial Independence Retire Early group on Facebook, and I see this question pop up in one form or another repeatedly, which is your primary residence an investment? And if it somehow shouldn't count, then doesn't that mean that one shouldn't count it towards one's net worth either? So, let's dig in a bit, okay? I'll give some for and against arguments, generally speaking, and reach a conclusion pretty quickly. Okay, number one, the for side. Well, all real estate is an investment to some people, right? Since they do retain their value relatively well and may even appreciate, right? In fact, I'd say that most do. The only difference is whether it's at a good enough rate to not only keep up with, but beat inflation, right? Plus, home equity, honestly, in most research counts as a significant part of most people's net worth. Not just, significantly arbitrarily. Usually it's actually the largest chunk of an average person's net worth, even above what they have in their retirement accounts. Of course, this is assuming that we should, count the equities in one's primary residence to begin with, right? And number two, the general against argument, honestly, is just this, right? You have to live somewhere, and the equity within a home is not exactly money you can access unless you sell the home or use an instrument like HELOC, right? Now, if you sell your home, again, we're back to square one because you need to live somewhere. And most people are terrible at adjusting their lifestyles downwards. And HELOCs, on the other hand, they come with an interest rate, right? So it's not quite like money in the bank, right? And not really like accessing your equity as it's simply money, that you actually have. And housing costs for most Americans are the largest household expense. So the idea of trading one mortgage for a different mortgage or going back to rent simply doesn't sound like a reasonable compromise for most people. Therefore, some people shouldn't they don't think that primary residences should count. Now, for me, the conclusion is really about the actual argument of whether your primary residence is an asset, aka something that generates income, right? Because you do have to live there, generally speaking. So long as it can serve the function of generating income, either in, you could rent out the room, both long or short term, or even if you're, let's say, willing to leave your actual primary residence when and if you're in an economic pinch and let it make money over the amount it would take you to replace your housing cost, then your primary residence absolutely should count as an asset, all right? I saw this pretty extreme example of one of these in one of these MSNBC stories about, I think it's, or is it CNBC, about millennial living and how this dude bought a very small apartment in Austin that he doesn't actually even live in. He simply rents it out and then he lives in his van to keep costs really low. But even the income from using his only real estate property for short-term rentals generates him enough to not worry about, just his regular living expenses because of how minimally he lives, right? Now, technically one can argue whether his van or his condo is actually his primary residence, but I think in the eyes of the law, since he only owns one real estate property, the condo is his primary residence, right? My point is that even a studio can be an asset if one is willing to go to that type of extreme, right? Of having even lower cost of living than what that primary residence can actually bring in. But, that's one end of the extreme. We live in America, or I do anyway, so where housing is actually humongous according to world standards, right? These days, people call it house hacking, which I think sounds cool, but, also sounds a bit contrived. When I was a noob at working, we just called it get a roommate, okay? So if you bought like if you had enough money and resources to have bought into any regular size housing bigger than a 1-bedroom apartment, yes, you can turn your primary residence into a income producing asset. Now, I'm not saying that you absolutely have to, right? Just that the mere possibility of it makes it an asset, right? When times are flush, hey, sure, no need to rent out your extra room if you don't like people much or whatever. But the option is there, so when the worst happens, such as job loss or things like a pandemic, then if your primary residence has the option of generating dollars in a pinch, it's clearly an investment, okay? After all, everyone in our society needs a place to live, not just homeowners, who are, I don't even think homeowners are the majority. So is primary residence an investment? The answer, I think, really, at the end of the day, depends on your attitude, right? Now, if you live in like a 2,500 square foot house, which actually at this point is around the average for a brand new housing built, if you live in this kind of house by yourself or with like a single partner, but absolutely refuses to entertain renting out a room under any circumstances, then you should probably not count your house in your net worth at all, right? Because this attitude also pretty much tells me that you're incapable of adaptation and is very unlikely to downgrade unless it's some extreme levels of like lifestyle change, like traditional old people retirement, right? Now, on the other hand, if you're scrappy and willing to and are capable of adapting and always thinking about maximizing returns on your investments, then usually housing purchases has been a great method, all right? Especially these days with short-term rentals becoming popular, right? It absolutely will take more attention and care and work on this type of person's part, right? But even primary residences can produce income, and therefore, then this should count towards your net worth. Now, hey, worst comes to worst, you can always sell your property and move to a country with a much lower cost of living. Boom, problem solved. Okay, maybe wait until the pandemic's over for that method, right? In the meantime, check out some of my other clips in the corners. Cheers.